when the government shutters its doors, who legally holds the power to unlock the federal treasury and feed 42 million hungry Americans?
Yeah, that's not just a hypothetical anymore, is it? We're watching a real constitutional cage match play out. The judicial branch has thrown down a direct challenge to the executive branch over Congress's most fundamental power, the power of the purse.
Absolutely. We're diving deep today into what feels like a legal and political earthquake that just hit the U.S. this week. So on November 6, 2025, U.S. District Judge John J. McConnell Jr. issued a very direct order.
Immediate.
Right, immediate. He told the Trump administration, you need to fully fund the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that's SNAP, for November, and you need to do it by Friday or face the consequences.
And this ruling, it lands smack in the middle of this ongoing government shutdown, a political mess, frankly, that had already caused SNAP benefits to lapse for the first time ever.
A historic lapse.
Yeah. Now, the administration argued they were playing by the book. They said, look, we can only cover about 65% of the maximum benefit using the limited contingency funds we legally have access to.
They claimed trying to scrape together the rest would just cause huge logistical delays for the states trying to calculate new amounts.
But Judge McConnell, he wasn't buying the administration's, let's say, careful math. He called any delay simply unacceptable.
And he cited the irreparable harm being done, specifically mentioning 16 million children who rely on that SNAP aid. He clearly viewed the partial funding not as legal necessity, but maybe as a political tactic.
And the executive branch response was instant. Vice President J.D. Vance shot back, calling the ruling absurd. He basically said, in a shutdown, a federal court cannot tell the president how to triage the situation.
That word triage is key there.
It is. They're framing their actions not as trying to withhold funds, but as, responsible management of incredibly scarce resources during a crisis created by Congress.
So our mission today is to unpack this core constitutional clash for you. You've got Congress's historic power to control the money versus the executive branch's duty to manage spending, especially in a crisis. And the big question hovering over it all.
Can the judiciary step in? Can it act like an unelected spending committee, deciding where money goes based on its interpretation of who needs it most urgently?
Okay, to really get why the administration appealed so fast, we need to look at the judge who issued the order, John J. McConnell Jr. Because his background is, it's central to how critics are framing this whole thing politically.
That context is pretty important here. Judge McConnell, he was appointed by President Barack Obama, and before becoming a judge, he was deeply involved in Democratic politics.
How so?
Well, for 14 years, he served as the treasurer of the Rhode Island Democratic State Committee.
Okay, treasurer. And his financial history adds another layer, doesn't it? He and his wife were known as major donors to Democratic candidates.
That's right, including Senators Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse, the very senators who recommended him for the judicial spot.
And then there's the income aspect. He was expecting to receive significant fees, potentially millions per year, for his past legal work on that massive $264 billion tobacco settlement he helped draft.
So for those questioning his ruling, this background, it screams political motivation, doesn't it? It feeds the narrative that this might be less about a neutral legal interpretation and more about using the bench to push back against the current administration.
Kind of a political player in judicial robes is the picture being painted.
That's the framing, yeah.
So the optics are definitely there. A judge with deep Democratic ties versus a Republican administration. But the White House insists, wait, this isn't politics for us, we're just following the law. What's the specific legal rule they claim tied their hands on the funding?
Their main legal shield is a law called the Anti-Deficiency Act. It's a cornerstone of government financial management.
And what does it do, basically?
It's pretty strict. It flatly says the executive branch cannot incur financial obligations, meaning they can't promise to pay for something unless Congress has already specifically appropriated the money for that purpose.
Okay, so they can't spend money they haven't officially been given by Congress.
Exactly. No IOUs allowed, essentially.
But hang on, if that's their defense, how does that square with the judge citing irreparable harm to 16 million children? I mean, are they really saying following that budget rule is legally and maybe morally more important than preventing people from going hungry right now?
Well, the administration argues they don't have the legal choice. Their position is that the judge's order is actually forcing them to violate the Anti-Deficiency Act.
How so?
They're saying it compels them to either illegally obligate funds they don't have appropriated or to raid money Congress set aside for completely different purposes. So in their view, the court is essentially ordering the executive branch to break a fundamental law.
A law designed specifically to keep spending power with Congress. That leads us right into the absolute core of this whole fight. The constitutional power of the purse.
The bedrock. It's right there in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, the Appropriations Clause. It's short and direct. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
Seems simple, but the implications are huge, right? It means Congress, and only Congress, has the ultimate say over public money. It's like Congress holds the keys to the vault. A judge or a president might say the money should go somewhere.
But they can't legally open the Treasury themselves without Congress passing a law saying, okay, spend this money on that.
Any spending has to be authorized by legislation first.
That's the principle. The executive can't just decide to move money around because they think it's a good idea, especially when Congress hasn't acted, like failing to pass a budget.
Now, Judge McConnell's order wasn't vague. He didn't just say, find the money. He pointed to specific accounts. He told them exactly which checkbooks to use.
Right. He identified two specific funding streams he believed were legally available. First, the SNAP Contingency Fund, which the administration was already tapping for that 65% partial benefit.
Okay, that part was already in play.
Yes. But second, and this is the real point of contention, he ordered them to use something called Section 32 funds. This is a flexible USDA fund, kind of an emergency reserve.
Section 32. What's that normally used for?
Usually it's for things like stabilizing farm prices, dealing with agricultural surpluses, unexpected issues, but crucially, it also serves as a primary backup for other vital nutrition programs, like the Children's Nutrition Program.
So using it for SNAP might mean less money for school lunches or WIC.
That was exactly the administration's argument. They said tapping Section 32 for SNAP would deplete the funds needed for these other important programs later on.
But the judge, he just rejected that argument entirely, called it a facade, basically.
He did. He looked at their math and said, essentially, you're wrong. He argued that even if they diverted the money for SNAP, there'd still be enough left in Section 32 to fund the Children's Nutrition Program through May and beyond of next year.
So he found their resource depletion argument factually incorrect.
Factually incorrect, and this is the loaded legal term he used, entirely pretextual, meaning he thought it was just an excuse.
And to back that up, he pointed to President Trump's own public statements, didn't he? Statements linking full SNAP funding to Democrats agreeing to reopen the government.
Exactly. The judge saw that as evidence the withholding wasn't really about Anti-Deficiency Act compliance, but was being used as political leverage.
Okay, so this really escalates the separation of powers conflict. The executive branch's main legal counterargument seems to be that the court order isn't just interpreting law, it's commanding the executive to act in a way that undermines its constitutional duties.
Right. They argue that forcing them to fully fund SNAP, something Congress hasn't explicitly funded in this shutdown context, goes way beyond just enforcing an existing law. It's forcing an expenditure.
So the administration sees it as the court telling them which unfunded program, SNAP, to prioritize over other programs potentially funded through Section 32. That sounds like allocating funds.
Which is a power reserved solely for Congress, according to the Constitution. They're essentially challenging the idea that a judge's assessment of irreparable harm can override the established constitutional process for spending money.
Their argument is basically, if Congress wanted SNAP fully funded during a shutdown, they needed to pass a law saying so.
That's the essence of it.
So ever the ruling came down, the USDA didn't hesitate. About an hour later, boom, notice of appeal filed with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit in Boston. The stakes here feel enormous.
They really are. The appeal leans heavily on that executive efficiency and discretion argument. Remember VP Vance's quote about the court not being able to tell the president how to triage the situation?
Yes, that's central.
They're arguing that the executive branch is the one constitutionally responsible for managing the government, especially during a crisis like a shutdown. They need the discretion to allocate the very limited funds they do have, that $4.6 billion in contingency money, in the way they deem best to keep essential functions running until Congress gets its act together.
And the potential precedent here is, well, it's concerning from their perspective. If a court can force the use of flexible funds like Section 32 for a specific program like SNAP, based on perceived harm.
Then what stops that from happening in every future shutdown? It could open the door for judges who are unelected to effectively set spending priorities based on their own judgment of social need, completely bypassing the appropriations clause in Congress.
That really would undermine the whole idea of democratic accountability through the power of the purse, wouldn't it? If Congress's power to control spending by, well, not spending can just be overruled by a judge.
Then that fundamental check on executive power and the primary tool voters have through their representatives to control government action is significantly weakened.
We also have to touch on the practical side. What happens if the executive branch just drags its feet or refuses to comply fully while the appeal is pending? Who enforces a court order against the administration itself?
Well, enforcement technically falls to the Department of Justice.
Which is part of the executive branch being ordered to act.
Exactly. So the reality is, as we've seen in some other past disputes over spending, a contempt finding against the administration can end up being largely symbolic. It's a powerful legal statement, but it doesn't magically make the money flow if the executive branch chooses to continue challenging the court's authority up the chain.
So this deep dive really lays bare a huge separation of powers conflict. You have a political failure, a shutdown basically forcing the judicial branch into a role historically reserved for the legislature, controlling the nation's checkbook.
And looking at it from the administration's perspective, the core argument they're making on appeal is this. The crisis wasn't created by them trying to deny benefits. The crisis stems from Congress's failure to do its basic job, pass a budget.
They see the appeal as defending a crucial constitutional firewall.
Precisely. They'd argue that if spending decisions start coming routinely from judges instead of elected legislators, the entire system of accountability through the power of the purse gets broken, irreparably undermined, perhaps.
Okay, so we've seen a court order the government to spend money based on a finding of irreparable harm, potentially overriding the executive's reading of congressional appropriations law. It leaves us with a really critical question for you, the listener, to think about.
Where exactly does the Constitution draw the line? When is a court rightly protecting citizens from harm, and when does it cross over into acting like an unelected spending committee, fundamentally altering the balance of power?